When my own son told me I wasn't welcome for Christmas, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply smiled, got into my car, and made one phone call that would change everything. That sentence has echoed in my mind every single day since. Over and over, because when your own child, the very one you raised with your bare hands, the one you sacrificed every comfort for, looks you in the eye and says you're not wanted anymore, it doesn't just sting. It crushes you. It breaks you in a way nothing else can. But here's the thing about me. I'm not some fragile old woman who folds the moment life turns cruel. I've endured too much, sacrificed too much, held my tongue and swallowed my pain for far too long. And what my son and his wife didn't know is that even a mother's patience has limits. That night, when he shut me out, I decided I would not be the helpless mother they thought I was. I would be something else, something they would never forget. It was the week before Christmas. The whole town was glowing with lights, joy spilling from every window. Families were hurrying home with their shopping bags, laughter on their lips. Children ran through the snowy streets with their cheeks flushed red. And me? I stood outside my son's house with a small gift box in my hands. Inside was a scarf I had knitted myself. Hours of work. My old hands had ached while I stitched it, but I didn't mind. It was for my granddaughter. She used to run into my arms every time she saw me. She used to beg me to tell her stories at night. That scarf was meant for her. But on that night, my arms were empty. My hands felt numb around that little box, my heart heavier than the snow that gathered on the roof. When I rang the bell, I expected warmth. I expected love. Instead, what I got was a dagger through the chest. My son opened the door. His wife stood behind him, smirking like she always did when she looked at me, as if I were nothing more than an unwelcome shadow. And then he said it. The words that froze me in place. "Mom, you're not welcome here this Christmas. We don't want you around anymore." I felt my lips tremble. I tried to speak. "But I brought gifts, He didn't even let me finish. The door closed. Just like that. I stayed standing there for a long time, the winter wind cutting through me, my breath visible in small clouds. My hands shook. My chest tightened, and then something inside me shifted. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't pound on the door like some pitiful beggar. Instead, I smiled, because in that moment I remembered something very important. That house, that beautiful, decorated home my son thought belonged to him. It wasn't his. It was mine. My name was on the deed. I had made every mortgage payment when he and his wife had financial struggles. I had paid the property taxes. I had kept it all afloat when their finances collapsed. That house existed because of me. And he had just slammed the door in the face of the true owner. So I walked back to my car. I placed the gift box gently on the passenger seat. I started the engine, and with hands steadier than they had been in years, I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. "Sell the house," I said. 3 words. That's all it took. That was the night everything changed. That was the night my revenge began. I went home that night, but there was no peace waiting for me inside. I sat down in the dark, still clutching that little gift box with the scarf inside. My chest felt tight. That scarf had been made with love, with every stitch carrying a memory, a prayer, a hope for my granddaughter's warmth. Now it sat useless in my lap, a reminder of how far I had fallen from my own family. My mind wandered back to years ago, when my son was little, when it was just him and me against the world. His father had walked out on us when he was only 6. No warning, no explanation. One day he was there, and the next, he was gone. I had to become everything: mother, father, provider, protector. I worked 3 jobs back then. By day I stitched clothes for neighbors. By night, I cleaned offices where no one even noticed me. I skipped meals just to make sure my son had enough food on his plate. I wore the same old winter coat for 15 years, while I made sure he always had something decent to wear to school. I remember looking at his face every night while he slept, promising myself that he would never feel abandoned again. And for a while, he didn't. He grew up, smart and ambitious. He used to tell me I was his supermom. I remember the day he got into college. We didn't have the money for tuition, but I pawned the last piece of jewelry I had, my wedding ring, the only thing left of my past life. I gave it away with no hesitation, just so he could have a future. He hugged me and whispered, "Mom, I'll never forget what you've done for me. I'll always take care of you," I believed him. But things changed after he married her. From the beginning, I knew his wife saw me as a problem, a piece of baggage she wished he didn't carry. She never said it outright at first, but her looks, her sighs, her subtle remarks, each one was a needle under my skin. "Maybe you should get your own place, Mom. Don't you think it's time you moved on?" she'd say sweetly, but her eyes were cold. I ignored it. I thought, she's young, she doesn't understand. She'll see one day how much I care. But instead, she worked on him. Little by little, my son stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped looking at me the way he once did. And then, that night, he shut the door on me as if I were nothing. But here's the thing they both forgot. That house they loved showing off, that cozy home with the Christmas lights and the warm fireplace, it wasn't theirs. It was mine. I had bailed them out when the bank threatened foreclosure. I had been the one quietly paying. Property taxes behind the scenes when they forgot. Every nail, every brick, every shingle on that roof. It existed because of me. So when he told me I wasn't welcome, all I could think was, "You've just slammed the door in the face of the true owner." The scarf slipped from my lap that night as I reached for my phone again. I heard my lawyer's tired voice on the other end of the line, but I didn't care how late it was. My voice was steady, strong. "That house," I told him. "The one my son lives in. It's under my name. I want you to prepare the papers. We're selling it." He hesitated for a moment. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" I almost laughed. I've never been more sure in my life. When I hung up, I looked at the scarf lying at my feet. My granddaughter would still get it one day. I promised myself. But she would get it when the truth was revealed. When she was old enough to understand who really cared for her. I had lived my whole life giving, sacrificing, enduring in silence. But now it was time for me to take something back. Time for me to remind them of a truth they had conveniently forgotten. Love is a gift, not an obligation. And when you spit on it, when you slam a door on it, you lose it forever. The next morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, but also with a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about how to make my son's life easier, or how to smooth things over with his wife. My thoughts were finally about me, about what I had endured, about what I had sacrificed. I stood by the kitchen window, holding a cup of black coffee, watching the frost climb along the glass. Memories rushed in, uninvited but sharp. The winters when I couldn't afford heating, so I bundled my little boy in blankets and held him close all night just to keep him warm. The nights I worked myself half to death because he needed books, shoes, food, everything a growing child deserved. I thought about the time he was 12, when he came home crying because the other boys at school laughed at his worn-out sneakers. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, stitching together every spare piece of fabric until I had enough to cover half the cost of a new pair. The rest I borrowed, humiliating myself by asking a neighbor for help. But the look on his face when he wore those shoes to school, it was worth every tear I shed in secret. And then there was college. God, how I struggled to keep him afloat then. Bills piled up. Collectors came knocking. I nearly lost my own small apartment, but I kept sending him money, telling him to focus on his studies. I told him not to worry about me, that I would manage. And somehow I did. By the time he graduated, I was exhausted but proud. I thought all those years of sacrifice would mean something. That when he finally stood on his own 2 feet, he'd remember who helped him get there. And for a while it seemed he used to call me every week, just to check in. He brought groceries when I was too tired to shop. He hugged me with gratitude. But then he met her, his wife. At first I tried. I smiled, I welcomed her. I made space in my heart for her. I thought of her as the daughter I never had. But I saw the way she looked at me, the way her smile didn't reach her eyes. She wanted me gone. She wanted my son all to herself, free from the weight of his mother's sacrifices. It started small, whispers in his ear, suggesting I was too old-fashioned, too involved. Then came the subtle pushes. Maybe your mum should move into a retirement community, or don't you think she interferes too much? My son would laugh it off at first, but over time her words began to stick. He called less, he visited less, until finally she had him exactly where she wanted him, cutting me out of his life. And now here we were, a week before Christmas, and he had shut the door on me as if I were nothing, as if I hadn't given him everything I had. But they had made one mistake, a mistake that would cost them dearly. They had forgotten that their precious home, their perfect little life, rested on foundations I had built. That house was not theirs. It was mine. I pulled out the folder that I had kept tucked away in my desk for years, the deed, the mortgage papers, the tax receipts, my name, my signature, my money, every scrap of evidence that proved the truth. I flipped through the pages, each one fueling the fire inside me. By the time I closed the folder, my hands had stopped shaking. I knew what I had to do. They had humiliated me. They had cast me aside like I was nothing. Now I would show them who really held the power. I dialed my lawyer again, this time in broad daylight. He answered more awake than the night before. "Good morning," he said. "Morning," I replied evenly. "I hope you're ready to get started. I want that house listed." Immediately he hesitated again. "You understand what this means, right? If we move forward, they'll lose everything. They'll be out on the street." I closed my eyes, picturing my son's face as he shut the door on me, his wife's smug grin behind him. "They already threw me out on the street," I whispered. "Now it's their turn." There was silence on the other end, and then he sighed. "All right, I'll begin the paperwork." I hung up and sat back in my chair. For the first time in years, I felt strong, powerful. They thought they had won, but they were about to learn a painful truth. You don't betray the hand that built your future, not without consequences. That afternoon I drove past their house, not to confront them, not yet, I wasn't ready for that, but to remind myself of what was about to happen. The street was lined with cars, families unloading shopping bags, laughter echoing through the crisp winter air. And there it was, my son's home. Or rather, my home. It looked like a picture-perfect Christmas card. Wreath on the door, lights strung along the roof, a glowing tree shining proudly in the window. I sat in my car, hidden by the shadows of the street, and watched as my granddaughter pressed her face against the glass, giggling while she hung an ornament on the tree. My heart twisted. For her, I would have given the world. For her, I had endured the coldness of her parents. And yet, her parents had stolen me from her. They had stolen her grandmother's love out of sheer cruelty and pride. I thought back to the times I had kept that family afloat. They liked to act as if their life was built from their own hard work, But the truth was uglier. When my son lost his job for the third time, who stepped in to cover their bills? Me. When their car broke down, who wrote the check for the repairs? Me. When the bank threatened to repossess the house, who saved them by taking over the mortgage? Me. Every brick of that house was stained with my sacrifice, and still they dared to lock me out. As I sat there, hidden behind the wheel, I saw my son step outside. He was laughing, carrying an armful of firewood. His wife came out a moment later, kissing his cheek, smug and radiant in her false victory. They looked like the perfect little couple. But I knew the truth. I knew that the ground beneath their feet was about to be ripped away, because the papers were being drawn up. The house would soon be listed, and once it was, they'd have no choice. They'd be out. For the first time in a long while, I felt calm. Not happy, not yet, but calm. Justice was slow, but it was coming. Still, a part of me wondered if my son even remembered. Did he ever think about the nights he cried into my chest when he was small, swearing he'd take care of me one day? Did he remember the way I starved myself so he could eat? Or had she erased it all from his memory, twisting his heart until there was no room left for me? The scarf I'd made for my granddaughter sat folded on the passenger seat beside me. I ran my fingers over the yarn, feeling the softness, the love woven into every stitch. One day she would have it, but not now, not while her parents were determined to paint me as the villain. No, I would wait, I would bide my time, and when the truth came crashing down on them, when they realized what they had lost, then I would place this scarf in her hands, and she would know that her grandmother never stopped loving her. I started the car and drove away, the image of their glowing home burning in my mind. Soon, all of that warmth, all of that comfort would be stripped from them. Not because I wanted to hurt them, number, because they had chosen this path. They had pushed me out, spit on my sacrifices, mocked my existence. And now, they would pay the price. The days that followed felt like a blur, but beneath the surface, something inside me was sharpening. My lawyer called to confirm the first steps were in motion. The house would be appraised, the paperwork signed, and soon it would be listed. He asked me more than once if I was sure. Every time, I gave him the same answer. I've never been more certain. But as I sat in the quiet of my small apartment, the memories kept flooding back. Memories I had tried to bury, but which now returned with cruel clarity. I remembered the nights I went hungry so my son could eat. The bitter winters when I pretended not to be cold, wrapping him in my coat while I shivered in thin sweaters. I remembered selling the last of my jewelry, my wedding ring, my mother's locket, just so he could afford college textbooks. I gave him everything, my youth, my strength, my health, my savings. And what had he given me in return? A slammed door, a heartless declaration, "You're not welcome here anymore." I tried to tell myself it was her influence, that his wife had poisoned him against me. And maybe that was true. But he was still the one who spoke the words. He was still the one who chose to turn his back. That was what stung the most. One evening, as I sat with the scarf in my lap, I thought of my granddaughter again. She was innocent in all of this. None of it was her fault. She deserved her grandmother. She deserved love. But her parents had stolen that from her too. They'd rather erase me than let me be part of her life. And so I realized something. My revenge wasn't just about me. It was about her too. One day she would grow up, and she would see the truth. She would see who had built her life, who had sacrificed so she could grow up in warmth and comfort. She would see the way her parents had betrayed the very person who gave them everything. That thought gave me strength. A few days later, my lawyer called again. The appraisal came back. he told me. It's a valuable property. You'll make a good profit once it sells. I let out a slow breath. Money was never the point. I didn't need wealth or luxury. I had lived without those things my entire life. What I wanted was something else. Justice. To take back what was mine. To strip away their false sense of security and show them the consequences of their cruelty. Go ahead, I told him. List it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining their faces when they'd learn the truth. The panic in his eyes, the anger in hers, the realization that everything they had taken for granted could vanish with the stroke of a pen. For so long, I had been silent. I had endured, hoping love would be enough. But love had been thrown back in my face. And now, silence would no longer serve me. This was only the beginning. The listing went live within the week. I didn't tell anyone, of course. Not yet. But I knew the moment was coming. The storm I had set in motion was about to break over their heads. My lawyer explained the process to me in detail. They'll be notified soon, he said. Since the deed is under your name, the sale is legally yours to authorize. They'll have no choice but to comply once a buyer steps forward. No choice. The phrase lingered in my mind like sweet honey. How many times in my life had I felt like I had no choice? No choice but to sacrifice. No choice but to endure. No choice but to give everything away just to keep my son's world from collapsing. And now, finally, they would know what that felt like. Still, I couldn't help but wonder how my son would react. Would he be furious? Would he finally remember all the times I saved him, or would he stay blind, manipulated by his wife's poisonous words? Deep down, I hoped for a flicker of the boy he once was. The boy who used to look at me with love, not contempt. But I wasn't holding my breath. One evening I drove by their house again. A for sale sign hadn't gone up yet, but soon it would. I parked far enough away so they wouldn't notice me. I watched them through the glowing windows. My son was at the dining table, laughing. His wife poured wine into his glass, her lips curling into that smug smile I had come to hate. My granddaughter twirled around in a dress, showing off to her parents as they clapped. It should have been a beautiful scene, one to warm a grandmother's heart. But all I felt was a deep ache. That should have been me clapping. That should have been me laughing with them, sharing the joy. Instead, I was an exile, banished from the very home I had built for them. My phone buzzed, snapping me from my thoughts. A text from my lawyer, paperwork complete. Buyers will begin viewing next week. I stared at the message for a long moment, then slipped the phone back into my bag. My pulse steadied. This was happening. There was no turning back now. I thought about what would come next. The confrontation. The moment when they would finally learn the truth. I could almost hear the outrage in my son's voice, the disbelief in his wife's. They would call me cruel, heartless, ungrateful. But what they would never admit is that they had brought it upon themselves. They closed the door on me that night, but soon the door would close on them. Permanently. And when that moment arrived, I would not flinch. I would stand tall with every sacrifice, every wound, every humiliation burning in my veins like fire. They had forgotten who I was, but they were about to remember. The phone call came sooner than I expected. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping lukewarm tea, when my phone lit up with my son's name. For a second, I almost didn't answer. My heart pounded against my ribs, part fear, part anticipation. Finally, I slid my finger across the screen. "Mom," he said, his voice sharp, almost frantic. "What the hell is going on?" "We just got notice that the house is up for sale. Our house. You can't do this!" I closed my eyes, letting his words wash over me. His house. He still didn't understand. After everything, he still thought it belonged to him. "Yes, I can." I said calmly. It's my name on the deed. My money that saved you when you couldn't pay. Did you really think you could slam the door in my face and there wouldn't be consequences? There was silence for a moment, and then I heard his wife in the background, her voice like venom. I told you this would happen! She's jealous. She's trying to ruin us. I almost laughed. Jealous? That was her excuse? After everything I had given them, after every sacrifice, she dared to call me jealous. My son's voice came back, angrier this time. Mom, think about your granddaughter. You're going to throw her out of her home? On Christmas? That stung. He knew exactly where to aim. But I steadied myself. Don't you dare use her against me, I said, my voice low but firm. I would never have done this if you hadn't shut me out. I stood in the snow, holding a gift for her, and you told me I wasn't welcome. Do you know what that felt like? He didn't answer. Maybe because deep down, he knew. His wife's voice rose again in the background. Don't beg her! We'll fight this! We'll take her to court! I spoke before my son could reply. Try. The papers are solid. The house is mine, and it always has been. You both just lived there on borrowed time. There was another long pause. When my son finally spoke again, his voice was quieter, almost desperate. Please, Mom. Don't do this. We'll make it right. Just give us another chance. For a brief moment, my heart ached. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe the boy I raised was still in there somewhere. But then I remembered the way he had looked at me that night, cold and unfeeling, as he shut the door. That wasn't the boy I raised. That was the man his wife had molded him into. It's too late, I said softly. I gave you chances. All my life I gave you chances. This time I'm giving myself one, and with that I ended the call. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from power. For once I was the one in control. The confrontation had begun, and it was only the beginning. The very next day my doorbell rang. I knew before I even opened it who would be standing there. And sure enough, when I pulled it open, my son was on the porch, his face tight with anger, his wife a step behind him with her arms crossed, and that same smug look etched onto her face. Mom, he said sharply, not even bothering with pleasantries, we need to talk. Now I stepped aside and let them in, though every fibre of me wanted to slam the door in their faces, just as they had done to me. They walked into my small, modest living room, the contrast between it and their perfect home almost laughable. My son paced, running his hands through his hair, while his wife sat on the couch like she owned the place. How could you do this? He demanded. Selling the house out from under us? After everything we've been through? I raised an eyebrow. After everything we've been through? Do you mean after everything I paid for, every bill I covered, every time I pulled you both out of trouble? That house is mine. Always has been. You just lived in it. His wife leaned forward, her voice dripping with disdain. You're pathetic. You can't stand that we built a life without you, so you're tearing it down out of spite. I turned my gaze on her, cold and steady. Spite? Number. Spite would have been leaving you to the bank when you couldn't pay the mortgage. Spite would have been keeping my money for myself instead of saving your skin. What I'm doing now isn't spite. It's justice. My son's face reddened. He looked torn between anger and shame, but his wife nudged him, whispering something sharp in his ear. He straightened, his voice rising. We won't let you do this. We'll take you to court. We'll make sure everyone knows what you've done. I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that made his wife's smugness falter for the first time. Go ahead. Take me to court. I have every receipt, every tax record, every payment saved. I can prove down to the last cent that I carried that house. And when the truth comes out, do you really want the world to know that you threw your mother out on Christmas? That you shut the door on the woman who gave you everything? The room went silent. For once his wife had no quick retort. My son dropped his eyes, unable to meet mine. You think you can humiliate me? I continued, my voice firm. But I won't be humiliated anymore. Not by you. Not by anyone. This is the end of your game. My son finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Mom, please. Don't do this. I shook my head. You already did. They left soon after, my son dragging his wife out the door as she hissed curses under her breath. I closed the door behind them, leaning against it for a moment. My hands trembled, but it wasn't weakness this time. It was release. Years of swallowed pain, of silence, were spilling out at last. The confrontation was over, but the real blow was still to come. 2 days later, the sign went up. Big, bold letters planted right in their perfect front yard. For sale. I wasn't there when the realtor hammered it into the ground, but neighbors were. And word spreads quickly in quiet suburban streets. By the afternoon, I'd already gotten a call from an old friend who lived nearby. Is it true? She asked, her voice tinged with shock and gossiping excitement. Your son's house is on the market? Right before Christmas. I simply said, it's my house. Always was. And before she could press further, I hung up. By evening, I could already imagine the whispers, the hushed conversations over fences, the raised eyebrows as neighbors walked their dogs, people wondering what had gone wrong behind the picture-perfect smiles of my son and his wife. That was the beginning of their public unraveling, and I didn't have to lift a finger. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from my lawyer. First viewing scheduled for Thursday. A family seems very interested. We'll keep you updated. I set the phone down and allowed myself a small smile. The wheel was turning now, unstoppable. The very next day, I received another call, but not from my lawyer this time. It was one of my son's neighbors, a kind woman who had always waved when I visited back when I was still welcome. Her tone was concerned. I don't know what's going on, but I saw your son's wife screaming in the driveway this morning. Something about betrayal. People were watching, I pictured it in my mind. Her carefully constructed facade cracking in front of an audience. The perfect little life she had tried to build, slipping like sand through her fingers. And all of it because she had underestimated me. I didn't go there. Not yet. I stayed in my own quiet apartment, waiting for the next storm to hit them. And it did. My phone rang that evening. It was my son again, his voice desperate this time, stripped of the bravado he'd carried before. Mum, please. People are talking. The whole neighborhood knows. Do you have any idea what this is doing to us? I closed my eyes, his words cutting deep, but not in the way he intended. Yes, I said calmly. I know exactly what it's doing. It's showing everyone the truth. That house isn't yours. It never was. And maybe now people will finally see how you treated me. He fell silent. In the background I could hear his wife yelling, her voice shrill and furious. He tried again, softer this time. You're destroying us. No, I whispered. You destroyed yourself the night you locked me out. This is just the world catching up to you. I ended the call before he could answer. My hands shook as I set the phone down, but once again it wasn't weakness. It was power. The justice I had long been denied was finally unfolding, not in shadows, but in the clear light of day for everyone to see. By Thursday, the first buyers came to view the house. I didn't go inside, but my lawyer insisted on keeping me updated with every detail. They're impressed, he told me over the phone. It won't be long before offers start coming in. I imagined the scene vividly. Strangers walking through those polished halls, admiring the fireplace, running their hands along the kitchen counters. My son's wife probably trailing behind them, fuming, her smile tight as she tried to hide her panic. She had worked so hard to craft the illusion of control, of status, and now she was forced to watch outsiders inspect the life she thought she owned. Later that same evening, I received another call. This time it was my son. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was broken. "Mom, please, I can't—" He faltered, his breath shaky. "We can't lose this house. It's our home. It's where we're raising our daughter." I stayed silent for a long moment, my heart twisting at the mention of my granddaughter. But I reminded myself of the night I stood outside in the snow, clutching that gift box, begging silently for just a sliver of kindness. And I remembered how he slammed the door in my face. "This house was never yours," I said finally. "I let you live in it. I carried you through every hardship, but when you shut me out, you shut out the very person who made it possible." In the background, I heard his wife snap, "Don't waste your breath. She doesn't care. She just wants to see us suffer." I raised my voice, firm and unshaken. "You're wrong. I don't want to see you suffer. I wanted to be loved, respected, welcomed. But when you treated me like nothing, you left me no choice but to remind you of who I am." There was silence, and then my son whispered, "What happened to us, Mum?" My throat tightened, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. "You forgot who stood beside you when no one else would. That's what happened." I ended the call before he could respond, clutching the phone against my chest as the tears finally fell. But they weren't just tears of sorrow. They were tears of release. For the first time in decades, I wasn't the one begging. I wasn't the one silenced. I had the power now, and they knew it. The next morning, I heard from another neighbor. Apparently, my son's wife had lashed out publicly, shouting in the street about me, about betrayal and theft, not realizing half the neighborhood was listening. Their perfect image was crumbling, piece by piece, and I didn't have to lift a finger. Justice wasn't just coming, it was already here. The day the official "for sale" sign went up on their lawn, the neighborhood gathered like moths to a flame. I wasn't there in person, but word reached me quickly. People whispered, cars slowed as they drove by, children asked questions their parents didn't want to answer. My son's wife tried to hold her head high, but she couldn't hide the cracks forming in her facade. Later that evening, I received a call from a neighbor I'd known for years. "I don't know the full story," she said cautiously, "but I heard your daughter-in-law screaming at the realtor in the driveway. Half the block could hear her. She was saying things about betrayal and how you've ruined their lives." I thanked the woman for telling me, and when I hung up, I just sat there for a long time, letting the satisfaction wash over me. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't slammed a door. I hadn't made a scene. And yet the truth was bleeding out for everyone to see. They wanted me invisible, irrelevant. Now the entire neighborhood couldn't stop talking about me. But it wasn't gossip I cared about. It was justice. It was balance. 2 days later, my lawyer called with an update. "We've already had 3 serious buyers. Offers are coming soon. It looks like the house will move quickly." I thanked him and hung up, my heart steady. I knew what this meant. My son and his wife would soon face the unavoidable reality. Eviction. No amount of pleading or manipulation could save them from the consequences of their choices. That night, my phone rang again. It was my son. His voice was ragged, weary. "Mom," he said quietly, "please, stop this. We'll make things right. We'll invite you for Christmas. I cut him off. "Do you think an invitation now means anything? After you humiliated me? After you locked me out like I was a beggar at your door?" He stammered. I was angry. I was stupid," she was in my ear. "But please, don't do this to us. to your granddaughter." My chest tightened, but I kept my tone calm. "Don't talk to me about her. You're the ones keeping me from her, not me. You used her as a shield to justify your cruelty, and now you want to use her again to guilt me into forgiveness. I won't fall for it." In the background, his wife's voice cut through like a knife. "Don't beg her, she doesn't deserve it." For the first time, my son snapped back at her. "Be quiet!" The line went silent after that, and for a fleeting second I thought maybe, just maybe, the boy I raised was still in there somewhere. But it was too late. The wheels of justice were already in motion. The house was no longer theirs, and soon the world would know it. By the following week, the gossip had turned into open conversation. My phone rang with old acquaintances, people who hadn't called in years, wanting to know if the rumors were true. "Did you really sell the house out from under them?" one asked, her tone dripping with curiosity. I gave the same answer every time. It was mine to begin with. And then I'd hang up. Let them wonder. Let them talk. Every whisper was another crack in the image my son's wife had worked so hard to polish. My lawyer called again, this time with finality in his voice. "We've accepted an offer. Closing will happen in 2 weeks. After that, the house will no longer be yours, or theirs. They'll have 30 days to vacate." I thanked him and hung up, staring at the phone in my hand. It was done. The end was written. My son and his wife didn't know it yet, but their perfect little world had already collapsed. That night I sat in my living room, scarf in my lap again, and thought of my granddaughter. She didn't deserve this chaos. She didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of her parents' arrogance and my revenge. But I told myself she would understand one day. She would learn the truth, that her grandmother wasn't cruel, but simply done being erased. 2 days later, there was a pounding on my door. When I opened it, my son and his wife were there again. This time, they didn't bother with polite words. My son's face was pale, his eyes hollow. His wife looked wild, unhinged. "You can't do this!" she screamed the moment I appeared. "You're throwing your own family into the street. Do you know what people are saying about you? That you're heartless, vindictive." I raised my hand, cutting her off. "Let them talk. The truth is written in black and white. Every payment, every tax receipt, every piece of proof shows that house was mine. You lived there because I allowed it. And then you slammed the door in my face. That was the day you ended any claim to my kindness." My son stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Mom, please. Don't do this to me. Don't do this to her." He glanced back at his wife, but she was too busy glaring at me to notice his desperation. I looked at him long and hard. "I already did everything for you. I gave up my youth, my health, my savings. And when I came to your door with nothing but love, you treated me like a stranger. Now I'm simply reminding you of the truth. You built nothing. You earned nothing. You're living in a house of cards, and it's already falling." For once his wife had no reply. She stood frozen, her mouth open, her confidence shattered. My son's shoulders sagged. I closed the door slowly, firmly, leaving them standing outside just as they had left me once before. Only this time, it wasn't me in the snow. It was them. The justice I had dreamed of was no longer a dream. It was real, and it was happening right in front of them. The closing day arrived with the weight of finality. My lawyer confirmed the papers were signed, the deal sealed. The house, their house, as they had so arrogantly called it, was officially sold. They had 30 days to leave, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. I didn't go to the house myself, but I heard the fallout soon enough. Neighbors called, some out of pity, others out of curiosity. "Your son's wife was in the yard again," one whispered. "She was screaming at the movers, saying it's all your fault." Everyone's talking, I pictured it in my mind. her shrill voice breaking through the cold air, her perfect little mask slipping away in front of the whole neighborhood. And beside her, my son, silent, ashamed, unable to look anyone in the eye. For once, it wasn't me being humiliated in public. It was them. A week later, I received a letter in the mail, not from my son, but from my granddaughter. The handwriting was uneven, the spelling clumsy, but the words pierced me to my core. Grandma, I miss you. Mommy and Daddy fight a lot now. I don't understand why you can't come over. I still love you. Tears blurred my vision as I held the paper. That scarf, still folded neatly in my apartment, suddenly felt heavier than ever. I pressed it to my chest and whispered a promise into the silence. One day you'll know the truth. One day you'll understand. Another week passed, and then came the final phone call from my son. His voice was flat, defeated. We're moving out tomorrow, he said. There was no anger left, no begging, just exhaustion. I hope you're happy, Mom. I closed my eyes, my throat tightening. Happy? Number, I wish it hadn't come to this. But you made your choice when you shut me out. Actions have consequences, son. I hope you never forget that. There was a long silence, and then he whispered, almost too softly to hear, I'm sorry. For a moment my heart cracked open again. The boy I had raised, the boy who once called me his supermom, was still in there. But apologies didn't erase the past. Not this time. The next day the house was empty. Strangers would move in soon, laughing and decorating their new home, while my son and his wife were forced to start over from nothing. It wasn't cruelty, it was justice, a reckoning they had brought upon themselves. And as I sat in my quiet apartment, scarf in my lap, I finally felt at peace. A week after they moved out, I drove past the house one last time. It no longer belonged to them, no longer carried the echoes of my sacrifices twisted into their comfort. Fresh curtains hung in the windows, a new car in the driveway. A different family had already begun making it their own. And strangely, I didn't feel grief. I felt free. I pulled over and sat there for a while, remembering the years I had poured into keeping that roof over their heads. All the bills I paid in silence, all the meals I skipped so my son never went hungry, all the nights I worked until my hands ached, just so he could have a future. For so long, I thought my love would bind us together forever. I thought my sacrifices would be remembered with gratitude, but life taught me otherwise. Some people, even your own blood, forget. They take and take until there's nothing left, and when you have nothing more to give, they cast you aside. That was the hardest lesson of all. When my son shut the door on me that snowy night, I thought my heart would never recover. But it did. Not because he came back, not because he apologized, but because I found the strength to stop letting myself be erased. I remembered who I was, the woman who had survived abandonment, poverty, heartbreak, and loneliness, and still stood tall. The woman who had given life and refused to let that life destroy her. I placed the scarf I had knitted for my granddaughter on the passenger seat beside me. I hadn't delivered it that Christmas, but I knew someday it would be hers. Not as a gift under a tree, but as a reminder. A reminder that her grandmother's love was real, that it had been there all along, even when her parents had shut me out. One day, when she was old enough to understand, I would tell her the truth. As I started the car, a strange calmness washed over me. Revenge hadn't filled me with joy. It wasn't about joy. It was about justice, about finally standing up for myself after a lifetime of silence. And in that moment, I whispered the words that had taken me years to learn. Real family isn't who shares your blood. Real family is who stands beside you when the world grows cold. I drove away, leaving the past behind me, ready to embrace whatever future still remained. A month passed before I heard from my son again. Winter loosened its hold on the town, but the air still carried the sting of cold mornings and unforgiving truths. I kept my life small: morning walks, hot tea, a notebook where I wrote memories I didn't want to forget. And then one afternoon, a soft knock came at my door. Not frantic or angry, just hesitant. I opened it and found him standing there alone. No wife behind him this time. His shoulders seemed smaller, as if he'd been carrying a weight he could no longer hide. He tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. I stepped aside. He came in and sat on the edge of the sofa like a child, waiting for a scolding. I left. He said finally, voice rough. "We're taking time apart." He rubbed his hands together the way he used to when he was a boy, cold, embarrassed, unsure of his place in the room. I thought if I kept her happy, everything would make sense. He let out a mirthless laugh. Nothing makes sense now. I stayed quiet, because it wasn't my job to rescue his feelings anymore. He lifted his eyes to mine, and I recognized the same storm I had survived. Fear of being alone. Shame of what he'd become. "She told me I had to choose," he said quietly. "Between peace and you. She said you'd never stop interfering. I believed her because it was easier than admitting I'd failed you." He swallowed. "I failed you, Mum." The word landed on the coffee table like a fragile glass. I remembered his small hands clutching mine outside the school gate, the nights I pressed my coat around him so he wouldn't shiver, the ring I'd pawned so he could buy textbooks. Love isn't a ledger, but memory can be. "What do you want from me?" I asked. He flinched. "Not money. Not a house. I'm done taking what I don't deserve." His voice cracked. "I want a chance to be your son again." Silence stretched. Outside, a siren wailed and faded into nothing. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who swallowed every hurt, who made excuses for everyone else while she disappeared. She was gone. But I also thought of the boy who once called me Supermom, who pressed a crumpled drawing into my hands and said, "This is our house, Mom. You and me, sit up," I said softly. He straightened, wiping his eyes with the heel of his hand. "You want a chance? It won't be bought with apologies. It will be earned with time, with truth, with showing up." He nodded rapidly, like a drowning man spotting shore. "I can do that. I will. And your daughter?" I asked. "Your wife used her name like a shield when it suited her. You will not." His jaw tightened. "I know. I won't. He hesitated. "She's been asking about you?" "About the scarf." He glanced toward the entryway, as if the scarf might float in from the hall. "She thinks you didn't come for Christmas because you were mad at her." I told her that wasn't true. But the damage. He trailed off. My chest ached. The scarf lay in a drawer in my bedroom, folded and waiting like a promise I refused to break. "Bring her Saturday," I said. "No grand speeches, no scenes. We'll drink cocoa. I'll give her the scarf." That's all. His shoulders dropped with relief. "Thank you." He rose to leave and paused at the door. "Mom," he said, turning back. "If I could go back." I lifted a hand. "There is no back. Only forward." After he left, I sat very still as the afternoon light slid across the floor. I was not naive. Contrition can be a mask. But I didn't hear excuses. I heard something rarer. A beginning. Saturday came with low clouds and the soft promise of snow that never quite fell. I baked the cinnamon cookies my son used to demand on every birthday, even when money was tight and flour felt like gold dust. When the knock came, it was small and quick, like a sparrow. I opened the door, and there she was, my granddaughter, cheeks pink, eyes wide. "Hi, Grandma," she whispered, as if the word might shatter if she said it too loud. I crouched to her height. "Hi, little star." I held out my arms and she came to me without hesitation, all warm wool and sugar breath. Over her shoulder, my son stood at the threshold, eyes shining in a way I hadn't seen since he was a boy. "Come in," I said. The three of us moved through the small rituals of ordinary love. Cocoa poured into mismatched mugs, cookies disappearing one sugared edge at a time, laughter rising in little bursts like birds startled from a bush. When she'd finished her second cookie, I went to the bedroom and returned with the scarf. She gasped as if I had brought her the moon. "It's so soft. I made it with my stories," I told her. "So when you wear it, you're wrapped in all the nights I'll read to you, even when you're at your house and I'm at mine. Can I wear it now?" she asked. Her small fingers fumbled at first, then my son stepped forward and helped her loop it around her neck. Our hands brushed. For a heartbeat, we were a family again, frayed but threaded. He cleared his throat. "There's something else," he said. "I've been talking to people. The bank, the realtor, the neighbors." He looked at me, jaw set. "I've been telling them the truth." I blinked. "The truth?" "That the house was yours. That you saved us. That I shut you out." His voice dropped. "That I was wrong." I thought of the driveway scenes, the whispered gossip, the way shame had eaten at me when I was the one being erased. Public wounds want public balm. I hadn't asked for it, but he was offering it anyway. My granddaughter tugged the scarf tight and leaned against me. "Daddy says we make mistakes and then we fix them," she said with the solemn authority of children. "Are we fixing them?" "We're starting to," I said. I met my son's eyes. "Knots hold better when they're retied with patience." He nodded, the words settling between us like a vow. When they left, the apartment felt bigger instead of empty. I washed the mugs slowly, grateful for the ordinary clink of porcelain against porcelain. Forgiveness is not a door you fling open. It's a lock you test, one careful click at a time. He kept coming. Not every day. Life has bills and jobs and custody schedules, but often enough that trust learned my doorbell's tone. Sometimes he brought groceries and said nothing, just set them on the counter and waited to be told where to put the milk. Sometimes he brought his daughter and a messy craft kit that left my table speckled with glitter for a week. Once he arrived alone with a stack of folders. Budgets, timelines, a list of what he owed and how he planned to repay, not money, but work, the kind you do with your hands and your hours and your pride. "I got a job," he said one evening, half embarrassed, half proud. Not what I wanted, but honest. "It's a start." "Starts are underrated," I said. I meant it. News travelled in the way it always does in small places. The woman who had been my daughter-in-law learned to avert her eyes when we crossed paths at the grocery store. No more screaming in the driveway, no more loud, perfect performances. I didn't gloat. Victory had already had its say. Now I wanted something rarer. Quiet. A letter arrived from the new owners of the house, my old house, inviting me to stop by if I ever wanted to see how they'd settled in. I stood with the note in my hands longer than made sense. The past tugged like a tide. In the end, I wrote back with thanks and no. Some doors don't require a second entrance. They require a gentle nod and a steady walk away. One Sunday, my son swept my staircase without being asked. He was humming under his breath, the same tuneless tune he'd made up at 7 when helping used to mean moving dust from one corner to another. I watched his hands. They looked like his father's, the man who had left us with a silence that lasted years. I felt the familiar sting, and then a strange relief. I was not the woman waiting at the window anymore. I was the woman deciding which windows to open. "Mom," he said, pausing on the landing, broom in hand. I told the PTA I couldn't volunteer for the holiday gala because Saturdays are for Grandma's house. He said it casually, but the words reached into my ribs and pressed against the center of me. The emptiest rooms had finally found an echo. That evening, he asked if he could share something online, a post, a kind of public accounting. He read it aloud in my kitchen, voice steady. I wronged my mother. I let pride and pressure make me cruel. The home I called mine was hers. She saved me more times than I can count. I closed my door to her. She opened the door to consequences. I'm not asking anyone to forgive me on her behalf. I'm asking you to check your own doors before it's too late. He looked up. Is that okay? I thought about the night I dialed my lawyer with hands like anchors. The day the sign went up on the lawn and justice felt like oxygen for the first time in years. I thought about the little girl in the scarf, cheeks pressed against my shoulder as if it were the safest place in the world. You can't rewrite winter, but you can learn where to plant trees that will break the next wind. It's your truth, I said. Say it. He posted it. The responses trickled in, then flowed, a chorus of small amens and quiet confessions. Not everyone understood. Not everyone had to. Some stories are not cautionary tales so much as maps. Here is the cliff. Here is the rope. Here is the way back, if you choose it. Spring found us. On a Tuesday that smelled like rain, my granddaughter and I planted marigolds along the scrappy strip of soil beneath my living room window. She pressed seeds into the earth with the solemnity of a priest. Will they remember to come up? She asked. They've been waiting, I said. Remembering is what brings things back. She nodded as if this explained everything. Maybe it did. When they left that evening, my son lingered in the doorway. I can't give you those years back, he said, but I can give you these. Then give me them well, I said. We didn't hug. We didn't need to. Some reconciliations are stitched with distance and care, not with sudden embraces that bruise old wounds. After they were gone, I stood by the window and watched the last light catch in the damp soil. I thought about the woman who had once been turned away from a door she paid for. I thought about the drive that followed, the lawyer, the papers, the sale, and the clean, terrible beauty of rightful consequences. Revenge had done what it needed to do. It cleared the ground. Justice is not a home, but it is a foundation. I set water to boil and took the scarf from its peg by the door, running my fingers over the softened yarn. It no longer felt heavy with what was lost. It felt warm with what had survived. I understood then that my story wasn't an ending. It was a boundary I had finally learned to draw with love that included myself. When the kettle sang, I poured the water and said, aloud to the empty room that didn't feel empty anymore, the truest thing I know. Real family isn't who shares your blood. Real family is who stands beside you, after the door closes, after the crowd quiets, after the winter. The ones who do the slow work. The ones who come back and stay. I turned off the lamp and let the dark settle like a blanket, not a threat. Behind it, the marigolds dreamed of a sun they had never seen, but trusted anyway. I slept easily. It was early. Summer when I realized the storm inside me had finally passed. The marigolds my granddaughter and I had planted were blooming in bright orange bursts beneath my window, their faces turned toward the sun as if they had never known darkness. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching them sway in the breeze, and for the first time in years I felt like I was swaying with them, not against the wind, but with it. My son arrived quietly that afternoon. No shouting, no demands, no desperate pleas. Just him, carrying a bag of groceries in one hand and holding his daughter's little palm in the other. She ran up the steps first, her scarf bouncing against her chest, the one I had made, the one she never seemed to take off. "Grandma!" she cried, wrapping her arms around me. Her laughter was sunlight itself. My son lingered behind her, setting the bag down by the door. His eyes met mine, not with shame this time, but with something steadier. "We brought chicken," he said softly. "Thought maybe we could have dinner together." I looked at him for a long moment. The man who had once slammed the door in my face was gone. In his place stood a man who had been humbled, stripped of false pride, and rebuilt with honesty. It wasn't perfect. It would never erase the past. But it was real. We cooked together in my small kitchen, bumping elbows, laughing awkwardly when the knife slipped or the spices spilled. My granddaughter danced around our feet, singing off-key Christmas songs even though it was June. And when we finally sat down to eat, there was no tension, no bitterness, just the quiet warmth of a family learning how to start again. After dinner, my son cleared the dishes without being asked. My granddaughter curled into my lap with a book, her scarf tucked around her like armor. I stroked her hair, breathing in the simple peace of the moment. When they were about to leave, my son hesitated at the door. "Mom," he said, his voice steady. "Thank you. For giving me another chance, for not shutting me out the way I shut you out." I studied him carefully. "You're learning," I said. "That's all I ask." He nodded, and then he and my granddaughter disappeared into the warm summer night. I closed the door gently behind them, not with anger this time, but with acceptance. My apartment was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty. The marigolds glowed faintly outside the window, a reminder that even after the hardest winters, things can bloom again. I set my teacup down and whispered to the silence, to the ghosts of all the pain and sacrifice that had brought me here. Real family isn't who shares your blood. Real family is who stands beside you when the doors are closing, when the lights go out, when the world feels cold. And sometimes, real family is who finds their way back after losing it all. I smiled, the kind of smile that comes not from revenge, but from survival, from justice, from knowing I had finally chosen myself. And with that, my story ended, not with rage, not with triumph, but with peace.